Aloha, I'm Lahaina Lee, and this is an update on Bill 9. Maui's been working through some massive, perhaps existential legislation. If passed in its initial form, it would rock this rock's economy, and not in a good way, at least in my opinion. The people of the island have been split, and the county council, the body tasked with getting the mayor's bill into law, has been split. The vice chair of Maui's Housing and Land Use Committee said, "This bill is driving people both for and against the bill crazy, and it's driving us crazy." The mayor introduced the bill because he said Maui people needed housing immediately. That was about a year and a half ago. And our county council has diligently tried to work through this, and one of the proposed ways to try to make it go down has been to add amortization periods of up to 5 years. Clearly, meeting the goal of immediacy is off the table. So when the mayor offered his comments to open the latest meeting of the Housing and Land Use Committee, I was surprised by his comments, especially thinking back to his initial comments when he introduced Bill 9. Back on May 2nd, 2024, he said, quote, "We come before you to announce our collective intent to phase out and repeal transient vacation rentals in the apartment district, also referred to as the Minatoya list. It is important to note that most, if not all, of these TVRs were previously built and designed for workforce housing in West Maui, and our goal is to return them to their intended purpose." Now, there's a link to that in the show notes in our pods. And I remember thinking, giving him the benefit of the doubt at the time, somebody is giving the mayor bad information. Most of these were built and operated as condotels, TVRs. Then what the mayor said at the opening of last week's meeting was, quote, "From the very beginning, we recognized that Bill 9 would require thoughtful conversation, community input, and most importantly, balance. It is clear that not all TVRs in apartment districts are appropriate for long-term residential use." And there's also a link to that comment in our show notes and on our blog site. So we went from most, if not all, to it is clear that not all. Well, in fact, the TIG found that over 4,500 of the condos on the Minatoya list are not appropriate for long-term residential use. That's 63%. Another batch of Minatoya condos have exemptions, and still others are in resort areas and will likely petition for zone changes if the bill and the TIG's recommendations are passed. So, based on the initial assumptions and the facts that have been discovered, it seems like we're going down the wrong path. Be that as it may, Bill 9 is still the path we're on. The council has been split, some adamantly for, some as strongly against, and then there are those constituting the fluffy cream filling in the middle. In such a situation, an option that's open to the council is to form what's called a Temporary Investigative Group, a TIG. So, what is a TIG and how does it move this process forward? Well, basically, it's a small working group the county council can form to dig into a complicated issue and come back with recommendations. They don't make laws, they study, listen, and report back so the full council can decide what to do next. Their job was to look at the situation from every angle. Which apartment complexes might still make sense for vacation rentals, even if Bill 9 passes? What would happen to the local economy, property values, and jobs if those rentals go away? How could the county make any zoning or permitting changes simpler, faster, and fairer for everyone involved? The group met several times in September of 2025, heard from planners, economists, housing advocates, business owners, and a realtor, and then pulled everything together into one final report that the council is now using to shape the next phase of Bill 9 discussions. So what did the TIG find? Well, the first thing you need to know is there are two lists that were created. One is Exhibit 2. That's a list of condos that would be allowed to continue doing short-term rental, and recommended list or Exhibit 3, which are the ones that would lose their right to do short-term rental. The county's Real Property Tax Division ran the numbers. The properties on TIG's Exhibit 2 list currently bring in about $27.7 million a year in property tax revenue. If those same units were reclassified as residential, non-owner occupied, the revenue would drop to $14.5 million. That's almost a 50% drop for those of you comfortable with rounding. And if every one of them became owner-occupied homes, the take would plunge to just $4.2 million. That's about an 85% drop, and that's a big gap, and a reminder that the fiscal hit could be far worse than the TIG's report even made it sound. Next are the ripple effects. Fewer vacation rentals means fewer visitors, and that touches everything from restaurant tips to TAT and GET collections to jobs in cleaning, maintenance, and guest services. But there is another side. If some of those condos return to long-term housing, that could help local families, especially in West Maui, where many residents are still displaced after the fires. The TIG acknowledged that even if Bill 9's intent is to free up housing, plenty of those properties will still likely remain in the hands of their current owners, off-island and on-island owners, rather than local buyers looking for, quote, affordable housing. So the housing benefit isn't guaranteed. And then there's the question of whether the HOA fees, the association fees, in those condos are affordable. After all those meetings, field trips, and late-night spreadsheets, the TIG came back with two big recommendations, kind of a two-part plan. Part 1, create new hotel zones, H3 and H4. So think of these as kind of a lateral move for properties that have basically been running like hotels for years. Instead of fighting over whether these places belong in apartment districts, the TIG said, let's just be honest about what they are. The idea, at least my interpretation, is to basically wave a magic wand and convert A1 and A2 apartment districts to H3 and H4 hotel districts where short-term rentals are clearly allowed. No expansion of rooms, no extra density, just putting those complexes in the bucket they belong in so everyone knows the rules. No, that would be too easy. It's still going to take at least 2 steps. If the Department of Planning introduces the legislation itself, it skips a few council steps and gets reviewed by the planning commissions right away, which could save a few months. If not, the council would have to introduce it, and then they would have to go through that whole process. So once the zones were created, those properties that make sense could be rezoned. Using a list of about 50 plus properties, that's the infamous Exhibit 2, the TIG recommended that the county rezone those from apartment to the new H3 or H4. Inquiring minds probably want to know, so what was the criteria? Well, that's a little fuzzy, but many are oceanfront. Some are high-value complexes where long-term affordable housing is an oxymoron, although that didn't hold true across the board. Some are right in the sea level rise exposure area where there's never going to be any new building, but that list, especially as far as the west side is concerned, is inconsistent. It was stated that areas that are predominantly tourism and resort areas are exempted, but that's certainly not the case in Kapalua. And some, well, those that have timeshares, yeah, those made the safe list as well. The TIG did say that property owners who aren't on the safe list, as I'm calling it, could still apply individually for rezoning if they believe they fit the same criteria. Of course, rezoning takes time, lots of time, and surely longer than the current council's term. I'm sure the council is hoping that if this is done right, this can be settled once and for all, as most of us thought it was the last time and the time before that. Now, remember I said the magic wand solution would be too easy? Well, here's where it gets tricky. Even if everyone agreed on the TIG's recommendations, the big question is which comes first, passing Bill 9 or creating the new H3 and H4 hotel zones? Bill 9 is already scheduled for its first reading on November 12th, while the new zoning categories still need to go through a long approval process, including Planning Commission reviews, public hearings, and finally council adoption. That could easily take 4 to 6 months or longer. So if Bill 9 passes first, technically those 6,700 short-term rentals in apartment zones could lose their legal standing before there's any mechanism to save the properties the TIG wanted to rezone. That uncertainty has a lot of people nervous. Lynette Pendergast, speaking on behalf of the Realtors Association of Maui, put it plainly in her written testimony. She said this sequencing would, quote, effectively remove lawful TVR use in apartment districts while offering no clear, timely pathway for property owners to apply for new land use designations or continued operation. Ram's concern was that this could create backlogs, inconsistent enforcement, and even legal disputes as owners scramble for clarity. And they absolutely have a point. It's like closing the road for repairs before you've built the detour. Even if the end goal makes sense, the timing can make or break the outcome. And some council members, including Chair Alice Lee, raised the same issue. Passing Bill 9 now might be a, quote, leap of faith that future councils will follow through on those new hotel districts. Everyone agrees that balance is the goal, but how we sequence the steps could decide whether this transition feels orderly and fair, or if it's like a hard cutoff that sparks chaos. So what happens now? Bill 9 is lined up for the first full council reading on November 12th. That's the moment when the council will decide whether to move the measure forward or send it back for more work. If it passes, it heads for a second and final reading before it becomes law. But that's where things get murky. It's not guaranteed that the planning department will even draft the new H3 and H4 hotel zoning bills. Step 1. Both Planning Department Representative Greg Post and several council members made it clear if Bill 9 fails, there's no reason to create those new zoning categories at all. And even if Bill 9 passes, there's still some debate about who should introduce the H3, H4 legislation, the administration or the council itself. That uncertainty is making a lot of people uneasy. A few council members all but said straight out they won't vote for Bill 9 unless those new hotel zones are already drafted and moving forward. Others feel the opposite, that you have to pass the bill before you start worrying about what the exceptions are. It's a bit of a standoff. Most seem like they want to reach a worthy goal, balancing housing for locals and fairness for property owners, but they can't quite agree on the order of operations. And even if they succeed, they're still taking property rights away from some people, and I can't see how that will ultimately have much benefit for those needing housing right now. So as for now, the timeline and the process are still in flux. If Bill 9 passes, we'll likely see a second wave of legislation to create H3 and H4. If it stalls or fails, those hotel zoning ideas will probably disappear right along with it. Either way, the next few months are going to tell us a lot about how Maui County handles complex housing and land use issues when so much and so many are affected. As I said, I think this is the wrong path to get to dignified, affordable housing. We're wasting time, we're spending tax money, and we're stuck. That said, I was so impressed, as were many in attendance, by the testimony of one particular Lahaina woman. She spoke of the need for cooperation and the need for community. She exuded aloha. We need to come together as a community, because when we lost Lahaina, that's what we lost. And we need to figure out housing. People who bought property that has the legal right to be rented short-term should not lose their property rights. And everyone should have a place to live. Everyone should be able to be housed and feel safe. That's good for our mental health, it's good for our community, it's good economics. And those two goals are not at odds. We can do that. So what's next? All eyes are on the November 12th council vote. If Bill 9 passes, the clock starts ticking for the county to create the new H3 and H4 zones and begin rezoning properties in the TIG's Exhibit 2. If it fails or gets deferred, those zoning ideas probably vanish and the debate over short-term rentals will go back to square one. Either way, the next few months will reveal whether Maui's leaders can find a path that truly balances housing for locals with a sustainable visitor economy and how willing the community is to navigate that balance together. Thanks for tuning in. If you have comments or questions, drop them below or shoot an email to lee@alohapots.com. I answer every one. And if you like this episode, give us a like and maybe send it off to someone you know who's thinking about Maui. And if you haven't already, subscribe to make sure you don't miss a thing. That's all for now. So, from the greatest island on earth, this is Lahaina Lee saying aloha. Tony Brown produced this podcast. The information provided in this podcast is for educational and informational purposes only. It's not intended as a recommendation to invest in real estate or any other financial asset. We are not financial planners, certified public accountants, or attorneys. You should consult with a qualified professional before making any financial, legal, or investment decisions. All investments carry risk, and past performance is not indicative of future results.